Welcome back to Lions Live. We are doing a special episode today. We are doing a Doc Talk episode with Dr. Dave Kempfert from the Bone and Joint Institute in Tennessee. They are our partners down near A to Z Sports headquarters, Middle Tennessee's destination for comprehensive orthopedics and sports medicine. If you need any help down there in Tennessee, go to boneandjointtennessee.org and you can get all the information you need about the Bone and Joint Institute. Great people. Thanks for joining me today, Dave. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me, Mike.
First off, we got to start here because this is interesting. You used to block for Lions quarterback coach Mark Brunell. You used to play for the Jaguars.
I did. So I played college ball in Montana. I bounced around. I never saw the field a whole lot, unfortunately, but was a small town guy. I got to play for 3 teams over 4 years. And the last place I ended up was with Jacksonville. Was a practice squad guy and an active roster guy for one whole day before I got released and headed my butt back to school for PT school. But Mark was everything you always hear about him. Great guy, great leader. My little bit over a year there at the Jacksonville Jaguars with him was fantastic and obviously learned a lot from a guy who is such a commander on the field. So great guy.
Yeah, I can attest to all that. Had the chance to talk with him, interview him. Great guy. Looking forward to talking with you. Today we're going to kind of get into some interesting topics because these are some things that I want to learn, and there's also some things I think Lions fans need to learn as well. So I don't know how much you follow the Lions, but there has been quite a few injuries in the last couple of years. It's kind of their big thing. And that has sort of taken fans to this approach that, well, it's probably because of the strength and training and conditioning team, and maybe they're not doing good enough. And I kind of want to break those walls down a little bit because I feel like that's not the right thing. I feel like that's not what's happening here. I think injuries are probably more of a luck situation. Are you able to, first off, just tell us kind of what the role of the strength and conditioning unit with any team would be and how that works?
Yeah, and I can see, obviously, when you love a team and you're a fan, you're a fanatic for a team, and it gets very frustrating to see people get injured, and it's easy to kind of go that route. So I think that the main thing people need to realize is that there's this big collaborative effort that's always going on. So very rarely it's very hard to put your finger on one thing and say there's the problem, right? Players have a responsibility for their own health as well, but the training staff in general is meant to implement and produce programs that obviously, the things that we think about all the time: speed, agility, quickness, power, all those types of things. But they have a big role in injury prevention as well. And on top of that includes things like nutritional aspects, and every team is probably built a little differently now. It's been a while since I've been in the league, but these things have all improved a lot since 2020 or 2000 when I got done, excuse me. But there's nutritional aspects, there's mental health recovery things as well. And so it's really a big collaborative effort of trying to make sure that not only are you preparing them for the rigors of, a brutal season and a physical game like they play, but also doing everything you can to mitigate the injuries that can occur throughout a season so you can maintain a level of play throughout a season with the things that are still playable.
Well, one of the things that the Lions seem to suffer from the most are like soft tissue injuries, which, and I'm not a doctor, that's why I'm asking you today, but my limited understanding is those things are kind of not really preventable. They're from wear and tear, and you just can't really do anything about it other than maybe load management, which really isn't an NFL thing.
Yeah. And just to be clear for the audience too, so I'm not a physician, but I'm a physical therapist. So we're kind of the experts in musculoskeletal stuff anyway. So this is good. I love these kind of questions. I think there's some things that are preventable and some things that are just not preventable, right? And so when you look at things that are preventable, it depends on how you're looking at it. So are strains and sprains preventable? Well, depends on if people have been working on their mobility, their flexibility. Have they been put in situations that are game-like situations with their training, those type of things. So if they haven't done those things, then maybe that could have been a preventable injury. But of course, with the velocity and the power that happens during the game of football, some strains and sprains are absolutely not preventable. They're going to happen, right? Concussions is another thing we can look at. Are some concussions maybe preventable? Well, sure. If we look at, is our equipment proper, right? They've done a lot of changes, especially over the last 6-7 years. really trying to improve the helmets. A lot of teams have changed the way they're teaching tackling, right? And they've gone back to some different rugby style tackles on certain teams and things. So some things are preventable through technique or equipment, but you're never going to get rid of concussions in sports. There's always going to be, contact with the ground, knee to head, helmet to helmet, those types of things. So some things I think they can kind of fit in both categories. Heat-related illness is another one that's usually pretty preventable. Making sure that the team is acclimatized properly to conditions that they're going to be playing in, obviously, in the warmer weathers and humidity and things, and making sure the teams are well hydrated. So I look at those things that I mentioned as kind of the more preventable things. The things that aren't as preventable, obviously, are like Laporta taking a shot in the back. From my understanding, again, I don't follow the lines regularly, but sometimes you're going to take a shot in the back, and that can lead to a stress fracture in the spine. And sometimes you can take a high velocity hit or fall, the speeds that go on. And I remember just coming out of the University of Montana, I played 1AA ball. And the biggest thing for me wasn't the size of the guys, which everybody thinks, gosh, are they huge? It was the speed at which the game was played, because the mental game is faster and the physical game is faster. So you have the fastest speeds with the biggest human beings ever. And those things, it's not going to be preventable to stop some of those fractures, those high velocity hits, the awkward landings, and those type of things. So I think that's when you look at it, is there's a lot of unpreventable injuries. And so that's where our training staff and even myself in my world, we treat athletes all the time here at Bone and Joint Institute. We look at those things and say, okay, how can I best prevent these things in these kids when we're sending them back to sport, or these college athletes going back to sport? And how can I set them best up for success? But I always tell people there's no way to prevent every injury.
Yeah, it's just going to happen. And one thing that we've kind of learned is, and we learned this with a player, Emmanuel Mosley, a few years ago, who I believe actually played at Tennessee, if I'm not mistaken, had a torn ACL, came back from it, and then tore the other one, which we kind of learned that, you're twice as likely to do that because maybe, I don't know, you're putting all your eggs into the basket of trying to heal this one leg and maybe not paying attention to the other one. And is that something that kind of happens? So if a player has a knee injury, they're probably going to have another one.
Yeah, and that can happen. And that's why it's so important to have people that understand the statistics on that. And so a lot of times, when we're rehabbing people, even here, and obviously the NFL teams know this as well, is making sure that we're not ignoring anything along the line. So it's real easy to get focused on a knee or even the joints just above and below it. But if you're not looking at core strength, balance, again, the mental preparation that you're getting them ready for, sports psychology is huge now. There's a lot of studies showing that an athlete who has a torn ACL, or even like a rotator cuff injury, those type of things, like a huge percentage of them fall into a category of clinically depressed during their rehab. And it's not just, this poor guy feels bad, he can't play football. It's like clinical depression, because it's that devastating to have this kind of an injury and surgery. And that doesn't just go for athletes, that goes for regular people too. But when this is someone's career, this is, everything they're doing that they've worked for, obviously that become a little bit more stressful on athletes at times. The other thing, and it's interesting too that you brought that up, and I'm glad you did. So there's a lot of systems now, and we have some systems here that are motion capture systems. In the NFL, I'm sure they got all the resources they could probably want. But there's a lot of things that we do now in sport, and you guys have probably heard about this, that you can actually measure the volume and cut down on overuse injuries and things like that now, because you're measuring the volume that somebody's putting in as far as impact running, cardio during the course of a week. So you can know, hey, are we going to be overstressing somebody's system a little bit much that now we're putting that at risk for an overuse injury? Or are we not stressing them enough that maybe we haven't calloused their body hard enough to get ready for the game of football? And so we use a system at our place that actually uses sensors on their back and their shins. It's called the Dorsa-V system. There's lots of different systems out there. But what it does is it actually can help us measure more than I can just see with my eyes or measure with a jump test. It actually tells us if someone's knees are diving in or out, how fast they're doing that, if their pelvis is not level, if they're compensating with their back or their spine, how many times they lose their balance versus the other side, if they're getting deep on a squat as they are on the other leg when they're hopping and jumping. And so there's all these systems out there that are great to have now, because instead of just kind of the old school way of doing things and, hey, can we still bench this? Can we run this 40? Can we jump this far? Can we bound on one leg this distance? We can actually see the mechanics specifically of what's going on. And that's really, really helpful for us to get these athletes back to sport and not only decrease their risk of injury, but potentially make them better athletes than they were before, which can happen, which is pretty amazing.
I'm glad you kind of led the conversation that way, because that's kind of the next conversation that I have in terms of the training staff. I think what's not looked at is enough, at least, is kind of how they're able to get some of these guys back onto the field. I think Amon-Ra St. Brown was a really good example. He had an ankle injury the week before, and it was, he's going to be out for 2 weeks, 3 weeks. And that was kind of the big maybe of it. And then he winds up playing the very next week. So it's just kind of, I think that there more attention needs to be paid to that. But what kind of things are you doing to help players get back to the field, or is that sort of an injury specific type thing? Is it all kind of the same? Or are we just going through the same program?
Yeah, no, it can depend. So it's never the same program. And as much as sometimes people want that, and it's easy to want to check boxes and say, this is what we're doing to make sure we're doing everything right. It's very individualized. It's individualized to the person and their attitude. It's individualized to their work ethic. It's individualized to the facilities that you have. It's individualized to what type of injury it was. So, I mean, you can have, a lot of times we hear strain or sprain. Well, a sprained ankle can involve one ligament or multiple ligaments. It could involve a high ankle sprain versus just a single ligament in the anterior kind of aspect of the ankle. So a lot of times it's hard to read that through the newspaper headlines or even the sideline reporting. And so there's lots of aspects, since that's where the rehab team really needs to get together and understand their player. On top of that, it's individualized to their position, right? What are we going to ask them to go back to doing? Completely different talk if we're talking about an offensive lineman with an ankle sprain versus a defensive back with an ankle sprain, and what they're asked to do and the velocity and the speeds and things. So it's very individualized process, number one. Again, if it's a surgical thing, obviously there's protocols and timelines, and unless somebody can prove to us that they heal faster than the human being, you're a little bit stuck on how fast we allow you to progress. But as always, surgical techniques are improving. Our understanding of the human body and the most effective ways to exercise, stretch, strengthen are always improving as we learn. So we're just continue to get better and better. And that's why we see guys. I mean, back when I was in high school, I remember if a guy tore his ACL, if he did come back, he was never going to be the athlete he was. And now we got guys coming back faster. It used to be 12 months injury, and now you got guys coming back, 6 to 9 months and looking as better as they ever have. And so it's pretty amazing where we've gotten with rehab. But again, it's a collaborative effort. It's speaking with the doctor, understanding the position, make sure we're contacting, the coaching staff as far as, hey, this is our expectation for timeline, so they can plan for the team and what they need to do in the meanwhile. Make sure the athlete's mentally and physically prepared. What modalities we use, so we can use, our hands sometimes are our greatest tools to get massage going, to prep soft tissue, to decrease swelling, all those things. Using other modalities such as like ice compression, heat when it's appropriate. We have dry needling. We have blood flow restriction. If you haven't heard some of these things, it's pretty amazing to look into, and using those things. But the biggest thing is when you are able to moving early and moving in the appropriate patterns of movement, and making sure that people are reaching efficient and effective movement that's pain-free prior to moving to the next step, right? And I remember back when I played, there was a player who tore his hamstring, and people started thinking he was just this fragile kind of player. And then I got to PT school, and I realized, well, this is why that guy never rehabbed well and never kind of made it back until the next season. Is he never had even gotten through the phases of healing before he said, I felt better, and they were putting him back on the field. And guess what? Same next game, he would restrain it a little bit. And the next game, he'd restrain a little bit, and then pretty soon it was a big injury. It might have been something that could have been a 4 to 6 week injury, and it took almost a whole year to get better. And so our understanding of when to take a break and when to push is really, really important.
I gotta say, Dave, you're killing it with these segues, because hamstring is kind of the next route I want to go here. I don't know if you followed Frank Ragnow, but all-pro center for the Lions, was supposed to come out of retirement just right before Thanksgiving, and then they go and do his physical, and he fails because he has a grade 3 hamstring strain. Mm-hmm. And that sort of brought a lot of Lions fans to this whole, like, how could you possibly not know? Is he faking it? And all this, which I don't think he's faking it. Mm-hmm. But is there a major difference between a world-class athlete and just, a guy like me? If I feel like if I had a grade 3 hamstring, I'd probably just die, right? But Ragnow, world-class athlete, really tough guy. This is somebody who had meniscus surgery and then played the next week. Like, mm-hmm. Is it different for everyone, or is it, would you not know, essentially?
Yeah. And I think definitely, I mean, when you play the game of football for a long time, like these guys have at a high level, pain tolerance is different than your normal person, right? My wife used to laugh at me all the time. She laughs at me now. I mean, I could stub my toe and I'll complain about it for a week, but back in the day, I'd have swollen hands, fingers, swollen knees, be limping, and I would never say a word, right? I just got used to it. That was what you got used to, and you toughen up and you callous yourself to those things. But a grade 3 is a little bit of a different story. So there's a lot of people, as far as the grading of strains go. So if you get like a grade 1 muscle strain, okay, it's usually like, hey, I felt it. There's no real limp. There's no real swelling or bruising. It's uncomfortable, and you can usually continue on with things like that. If you don't, it's a quick recovery. Grade 2 is a little bit more pain, limp. You might get some bruising. You might get some swelling. Grade 3 is classified as a rupture. So, and I'm not familiar with his case at all, or where the injury occurred, because it can happen in the muscle belly. It can happen where the muscle belly turns into tendon before it attaches to bone. So that all is a spectrum of how fast this is going to heal sometimes. But a grade 3 is actual rupture. So you're going to get potential deformity of the muscle when you get a grade 3, but you're definitely going to get swelling. You're definitely going to get bruising. You're going to have usually you'll have a pop or a mechanism of injury that you are very, very aware of. And discomfort to the point of limping and especially the hamstring. Anytime you're trying to extend your hip or bend your knee or both, that's the action of the hamstring. You're going to know it for sure, or you're not going to want to move it. So I don't know, exactly with the reporting on him when that came out, but even if you're a tough guy, even if you've had a lot of injuries, you got a pretty high pain threshold, you're going to know if you have a grade 3 usually. Yeah.
All right. Well, that answers that. So yeah, we're not super privy to where the injury was, or it just, he came in, said he had something in the hamstring, didn't know what it was. The physical showed that, what the severity of it was, but it is
at a later stage of healing. Sometimes, you can have those injuries in a training and they're saying, hey, it's still not ready, but it was a grade 3 hamstring strain. I don't know.
Is there any thought to, if anybody really, player, human being, whatever, is maybe not active and then it's all of a sudden really active, maybe there's a higher chance for injury?
Yeah, sure. And speak to me. I'm 51 now. I got to be careful how fast I decide to get back to anything. But yeah, with athletes or anybody, it's you have to prepare yourself for it, right? And so anytime you jump back into anything, it's never recommended, whether it's post injury or not. You have to get your body ready for it. And if you're not used to the velocity and the speeds, and this is the big thing too, is the transition after injury. This is a great thing to talk about. When you have these people that come back and they could be killing it in rehab, and the trainers are saying, hey, they're doing great. And the physical therapists, the doctors are saying, hey, everything looks healed. He's not having pain. We still allow people to transition gradually back to sport, because you can do that in an isolated room with me in rehab. I mean, I did a physical performance test on somebody today, and they're still showing a little bit of problems, but I can imagine what happens if they go back and you have the adrenaline rush. You're on, you got people making contact with you. You're in a competitive sport. You're back at competitive sport. You're on different surfaces, grass, wet, you're in cleats, all these different things change. So if you're still showing some things in the training room that aren't quite ideal yet, you really want to address those as much as you can. And you don't want to slow down the process, but you want to make sure you're integrating the process of unpredictability and contact and those types of things as you're rehabbing people through, because that's the game of sport, is complete unpredictability all the time. There's only so many things you can predict. And so you want to put them in as much game style rehabilitation as you can before you ever put them back on the field.
Speaking of game style, I just got a couple more here for you, but speaking of game style, there's some thought, there's some feeling again with Lions fans that maybe the Lions kind of get into the rougher practices a little bit earlier in the year. There's a ramp up period in the NFL now before you can get on pads and everything. But once the Lions get on pads, they tend to hit. They tend to go full live and I mean, they're really going for it. Is there any thought to, well, maybe if they're putting stress on their bodies that early on to the year, is that going to affect them later, or is that a good thing that they're warming up?
There's a pretty viral video coach up there talking to his players about this, saying, guys, if I knew a better way to do it, I would do it. And you've probably seen that one, right?
Definitely. Yeah.
You're talking to a kind of an old school guy here. And so I do think that it has changed a lot. I think that there's, like we talk about, all the advantages they have now and all these things, they can measure these metrics and they have all these systems of how much volume you're putting in. Is there benefit to that? Sure. Do I think back in the day was it a little overdone and the contact and things? I would agree it probably was. But I still think there's so much value to putting yourself in those situations. And like I always use that term callous, but you have to put yourself in those situations to get yourself ready for that. I know back in the day we used to do more 2-a-day full contact practices in 2-a-days. than they do in a whole season now. Which
it's crazy.
I'm not saying that was ideal,
right?
But when the season came through, it was almost a break sometimes, when things would get going, because it's a long season, but you have to get yourself ready for those things. If you're not used to all that contact, all that bruising, making cuts and taking those types of hits, there's limits to how often you want to do it. But I think you have to prepare your body for those things. But again, you have to monitor each person, and everybody, there's an individual out there. It's not just, you can't just take things as a collective. Other guys have previous histories. I remember when I started, Warren Moon was the first guy I ever gave a snap to in Seattle. Okay. And so here I was, this kid, just lucky to even be there and just loving to make it on practice squad. And I remember calling my dad and saying, like, Dad, you didn't look at 41 like Warren Moon looks right now. But he was so prepared that guys like him and the Tom Brady's, right, they've taken such good care of their bodies, and they hydrate and they sleep and they do all the things right. Those guys have the longevity they have for a lot of reasons. And so I think there's a lot of individual factors, like I said, that come into this. But when you get to the contact part of the season, I think there's limits that need to be done. But I think sometimes some teams, I would venture a guess to say that you probably don't do enough contact. And that has a mental and a physical impact on their body that sometimes it's hard to overcome.
Wow, that's a great answer. And honestly, I didn't think you were going to go that way with it, but that is good to hear, because I agree that I think it's a good thing to kind of get your mind and your body into that zone before you actually start playing, kind of get you prepared. So the last thing I do want to ask about is the big injury for the Lions right now was last Thursday. Brian Branch tore his Achilles. And I think there's a lot of curiosity as to what the overview of recovery for him could be. Everybody's different, but just a ballpark of a recovery period, and whether or not maybe you believe he could potentially be back next season.
Yeah. That's a hard injury, and that can be a very frustrating one, because I've seen a lot of these over the years. I've been doing this about 23 years now. And I remember there was an NFL player who was training at a facility, not with me, but he was just out there going through the ladder, something he does every single day, tore his Achilles going through the ladder. And he's just sitting there laying on the turf. And I go out there and look at him. I said, hey, I think this is what's going on. We're going to send you to the doctor. And he was doing something he does every single day, And so sometimes we see these high velocity impact things or cutting, planning things, like Jones this weekend for the Colts, right? And you see these things happen just during normal gameplay. But sometimes they happen and you're like, man, there is no reason for that to have torn. And so you look at it and say, why did that happen? Was there a lot of fatigue involved? Was there hydration issues? Was there lack of preparation of the tissue through training? And there's all these questions that you have, right? But the good thing is most people can come back now. If you haven't looked this up, it's pretty cool. There's little short videos on it, but there's a speed bridge surgery for Achilles. And so this is why we see the Cam Akers. I think Suggs might have had it done for Baltimore back in the day. But there's some new techniques with surgery that are allowing people to come back faster because they're able to start weight bearing earlier. It's a little bit safer to do it. Again, it depends on where it's torn, how it's torn, all those things, the skill of the doctor, the player, and all those things that get into it again. But I think that's why you're seeing some people come back faster. For normal people, it's going to be a year to return to activity. Okay. We are seeing some athletes in general, the faster athletes that maybe have a speed bridge or just recover very, very quickly. Can come back usually in 5 to 7 months is a pretty quick timeline. Sometimes that's not always recommended, but if they're meeting the standards, and sometimes you'll see people come back and do fine. Most people, it's going to be a 9 to 10 month injury. Some people who are a little bit on the delayed aspect, or maybe if they've had other injuries, or they're older, or they had some secondary things happen during their recovery or something like that. Sometimes the latter, the last ones to recover, you'll see them still take 10 to 12 months. But we're always saying, hey, it's probably a 9 to 10 month is a realistic window. But some people, this 5, 6, 7, or it's not 5, but usually 6, 7 month timeline can be achieved now.
Okay, all right. So it's yeah. So, if they went with the speed bridge, is there a risk to that, or is that just kind of the new?
No, in general, it just depends on where the tear is, and if it's not all physicians provide that, but it's pretty neat. It's kind of involved to get into in the video right now, but it's basically a knotless kind of suture that allows them to get a really good footprint to reattach the Achilles. And if it's kind of a mid-substance or mid-range kind of tear, they actually use this little jig that goes inside and they create like a bridge across. and then pull sutures and fiber tape, which is really tough tape, that kind of reinforces the strength, and they pull that all down, and it sucks that muscle up together, and it allows for faster weight bearing, which obviously allows you to start rehabbing earlier, and hence the faster timelines to get back to activity.
Wow. Well, this stuff is changing every day. I really appreciate you sitting down with us today, Dave. It's been great to get to learn all this stuff, and hopefully we'll